willing to allow his sort of anti-immigrant hysteria to overwhelm the goals of local police, of really keeping their communities safe.
Let me rein in my hysteria for a minute and make a point in response to the claim that the relatively small number of law enforcement agencies participating is somehow evidence that law enforcement doesn't want this. The fact is that half of all the illegal immigrants reported by local law enforcement, even today with the relatively small program, only half of them end up actually being taken into custody by the immigration authorities because they lack the detention space to hold them. In other words, the size of the program, the number of sheriff and police departments participating is small precisely because the Immigration Service can't accommodate all of the people, the dozens, really more like hundreds of agencies that would like to participate that aren't able to because of the bottlenecks in the system. That's evidence that we're not spending enough money on, for instance, detention space. It's not evidence that the agencies aren't interested in using this additional tool to help them do their jobs. They're not saying, boy, we want to stop going after criminals, we're instead just going to do immigration enforcement. They are using this as a tool to facilitate their efforts, their very successful efforts, at improving public safety in their own communities.
Are you critical of Joe Arpaio? Just let me get this response after ICE said it would go forward with the new jails agreement, but remove Arpaio's authority to enforce federal immigration laws on the streets, and then he goes ahead and holds this immigration sweep, arresting 60 people Friday.
Well, there's a couple issues here. First of all, this change in the way these agreements work, where they don't use it in the field anymore, that's across the board. It's not just for Arpaio. That's the new format that this administration has come up with, number one. Number two, I have no idea what Arpaio's talking about as far as what people look like and all of that. Maybe there's something there, I don't know. But his claim that state law gives him a tool that he can enforce state law is in fact correct, because in Arizona, the anti-smuggling statute applies to illegal immigrants as well as to the smugglers, as long as they knowingly were smuggled. In other words, they weren't kidnapped. That kind of thing does happen, but most of them are actually paying smugglers to be smuggled in, and that means they're part of the criminal offense of smuggling. It's a state law, and he can, in fact, enforce it. So he's on solid ground legally as far as the state law goes.
Chris Newman, your response to this and earlier what Mark Krikorian said.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that the idea that resources is the reason why only 55 jurisdictions opted in is pure fantasy. I mean, you know, the Police Foundation issued a report. The major police chiefs, police monolithically across the country oppose the expansion of this program. I think Mark and his group is in a, you know, an increasingly shrinking minority of people like Joe Arpaio who think these programs are effective. And I mean, it's just, again, you know, there is proof that these programs are used as a means of having pretext for stops of communities of color in the Deep South. It's just, again, it's just been demonstrated. And I think the final thing to say is, you know, to hear Mark actually boasting of this outlier, bizarre smuggling law that Joe Arpaio is using, again, illustrates the danger of devolving a federal immigration responsibility to states. We don't want to live in a country where every different county has a different immigration policy. You know, we want to live in a country that has a renewed national policy on immigration, one that preserves the American tradition as a nation of immigrants.
What does 287G mean for victims, for example, of domestic violence and other crimes afraid to go to the authorities, Chris?
You know, again, police chiefs who have looked at this program and examined it are afraid that victims of crime are going to be afraid of coming forward and cooperating with police. For the last 20 years, a lot of jurisdictions throughout the country have reduced crime by relying on community policing initiatives that enlist the community to partner and come forward and report crimes. The fear of communities where these 287G agreements have been implemented is that victims get pushed further underground, and the only people who actually benefit are criminals themselves. And so that we see, for example, in Maricopa County, the Goldwater Institute issuing, I should say, a very conservative organization issued a report noting that crime had gone up tremendously since Joe Arpaio had started his crusade against immigrants.
Well, let me jump in here. First of all, the Goldwater Institute is a libertarian think tank that articulates the interests of business, in this case, cheap labor employers, that ironically the left is in bed with and is shilling for. Secondly, we've actually looked extensively into this issue of have domestic violence reports declined in communities where they have 287G, and it just isn't true. Police chiefs are politicians. They're suits. They are serving and trying to address political interests. The actual police officers who use 287G as one of their tools in preserving public safety are across the board in favor of it. They're not interested in using this as a way of diverting their attention or time from public safety. They're using it as one of the tools to improve public safety. And frankly, immigration is such a widespread phenomenon nowadays, you can't, with a straight face, say that you are working to improve public safety in your community unless you are using immigration law as one of the tools to help you do that.
Final comment, Chris Newman.
Well, I mean, the first thing, of course, is that police chiefs are public servants, and in fact, the politicians, sheriffs, people like Joe Arpaio have used 287G to demagogue the issue. But, I would say that Mark's assertions are not credible. To just blanketly assert that police are in favor of it is ridiculous. This is coming from, the same organization that authored a report favoring an attrition strategy, one that seeks to reduce immigration in the United States by making life miserable for immigrants so that they, quote unquote, self-deport. That's the
illegal
goal.
Aliens, not immigrants. Illegal aliens.
That you don't distinguish, Mark, between either. And again, the result is that people like Joe Arpaio, by using the cover that you provide, with assertions like the ones that you just made, they're used again as a pretext to target entire communities of color within their area.
We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank Chris Newman, Legal Director of the National Day Labor Organizing Network, speaking to us from Los Angeles, and Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Washington, D.C.-based Center for Immigration Studies. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
Doctor, my eyes have seen the years and the slow parade of fears without crying. Now I want to understand. I have done all that I could to see the evil and the good without hiding. You must help me if you can. Doctor, my eyes.
Jackson Brown singing Dr. My Eyes. This is Democracy Now!